Today I am reviewing Pandemic Legacy Season 1, and I'm not showing you the game. Actually, I'm even putting the box away so that you don't get your hopes up, you don't get disappointed. I'm not gonna show you the game, not even the rulebook, not the boards, nothing. And if you know anything about the legacy system, or I should say the legacy take that has been applied to Pandemic in this case, and to Risk with Risk Legacy, which I have up here, but haven't played yet, then probably you know why I cannot show you the game. Let's start from the beginning. Pandemic Legacy is a variant of Pandemic. If you like Pandemic, what you like is still there. It is still a cooperative game where players control characters that are working against epidemics, and the characters have a certain number of actions, usually 4. They can spend them to travel around, to collect cards that will help them to travel further, or to discover a cure, and they can then spend sets of cards to find the cures to the diseases that are popping out on the map, and then through that they are trying to find a cure for 4 diseases. And then once a player has taken their turn, there is a random system based on a system of cards to determine which areas get infected later. You add cubes on the board to represent increasing infections. If there are too many cubes in an area, there's an outbreak, so you have to place cubes in connected areas that may trigger a chain of outbreaks. And the game ends. Usually, if you have a number of outbreaks that is of 8, that is usually the number that ends the game. There are variants of the game during their expansions that change things a little bit, but this is the general idea. Find the cures of the diseases on the board before the diseases outbreak too much. There are also other situations actually that may lead to the end of the game. Now, that's for Pandemic, traditional Pandemic. It is still there. Pandemic Legacy adds stuff to that. Basically, when you open the box of Pandemic Legacy, you find a board that is the board of Pandemic, the rules. You notice that the rule book has several empty boxes, so it seems like there are gaps in the rule book. But also there is a large number of components in the box which are sealed. Boxes that are sealed with numbers, cards that you're instructed to draw one at a time, carefully not to get them out of the little baggie that they come from. You have to read them in order and stop when you see a card that says stop, and the card instructs you also on when to read it next. So next time you set up a game, draw this card, so at that point you draw it, look at the side, follow the instructions. And also you have other sealed envelopes and things like that. Because the game is supposed to construct a narrative. The idea is that not all the information about the game is available at the beginning, so you discover it as you play a series of games, as you play a campaign. Basically, the game represents a year in the world of Pandemic, starting from January to December. If you're playing the campaign game, you don't have to. You can just play with the basic game and not worry about it. But in this case, probably you want to buy Pandemic, the basic game. You don't need to buy this version, which is more expensive. But if you're playing the Legacy version, then you start in January by playing the January scenario. And you follow the instructions, and each game has slightly different instructions. That is, at the end of a month, you will receive instructions about how you did, to evaluate your performance. You may receive bonuses if you did well. A new material is added, which is narrative material. You have short paragraph, very short text to tell you what's happening in the world of the story, and new mechanics are introduced to mirror those developments. So you find stickers that explain the new rules, and so you add them to the rulebook, so the rulebook changes. Stickers that are added to the board to represent new events that are occurring, even new playing pieces, new characters that are coming out and you can choose to use in following games. New abilities and upgrades, again in the form of stickers that you can attach to the cards of the characters, so the characters develop more personalities, more of a personality, more details, they feel more real, they're more customized. Relationships, I like that very much. You can attach stickers to 2 characters to make them co-workers or friends or family members or rivals, and there are different rules applying to this. So the game grows as you go on, new rules are added, new components are added. In each month, ideal month, you can play 1 or 2 games. That is, If you start in January with the first January game, if you win, then you move to February and you open the components that have to do with the February scenario. Also, you have a certain number of resources which you can spend to buy funded events. It's just special cards that give you special benefits, and you shuffle them in your regular deck. If you did well, then your founders, your financiers, your supporters think that you're doing well enough. You maybe don't need all that money. They redirect the funds, and so you lose resources. If you did poorly in the first game in a month, then actually you repeat the game of that month instead of moving to the next month. So you would play a second January game if you lost the first one, and you receive more fundings because people take pity on you and they give you more fundings. So initially this may seem a little strange and even gamey. I think, I don't know, maybe people will be tempted to lose a game just to get more resources, but I don't really see that as being a major thing. Gamers, players prefer to play challenging games and have the satisfaction of winning rather than to get resources, just to lose, who had the moral defeat of losing against the board, and then make the game easier. What seems to me is that this mechanism actually it creates a balanced situation. It's a self-balancing idea. If you're struggling, then you get more help. If you're not struggling, then you get a higher challenge. What happens, though, that is a little stranger is the fact that the story moves on anyways. That is, if you succeed, the story moves on to February. If you fail, you try again, and whether you fail or succeed, you move on to February again. Also, at the end of each game, whether you succeed or not, you get some upgrades that you can add to your components. Again, new resources, special things. I'm not getting into details because I don't want to spoil anything to you. But again, that means that there is an advantage, an objective advantage in losing the game, or in any case that there is not that much of an incentive. You do get sometimes the feeling that winning or losing is important to you, is important for the game you're playing, but it has a sort of fundamental disconnection to the overall story that the components seem to be attempting to create, because ultimately, no matter what you do, the story continues. No matter what you do, the story progresses, whether you did well or not. You're like, okay, that part of the world is experiencing the most horrendous troubles, but what you gonna do? We just move on to the next month. We did our best try. We tried, you know what. Which makes sense, you know, thematically. In a sense, you are not the biggest heroes. You're not the hero that saves the world. You are an organization of professionals that are trying to make things right, to relieve the pain and suffering of people around the world. You're a small cog in a large machine. It's very realistic, it's very thematic. Now, is that satisfactory? Is that really satisfying? Not necessarily. We go to watch movies where the hero is the hero that saves the world all the time. We read books where the hero saves the world all the time. I don't know, imagine that you were going to a movie to see an adventure movie where the hero does a lot of stuff, tries very hard, at the end accomplishes nothing, and in the last 15 minutes somebody that you haven't seen at all steps in, saves the day, solves the situation. I don't see people saying, yes, that's great, that's so realistic, I love it. Maybe they would that the first time because of the thrill of novelty, but if that happens too much, then we'd be like, yeah, you know what, I think I prefer my escapist fantasy to start with. By the way, it doesn't have to be an escapist fantasy, because if you're following the story of somebody that fails and somebody else steps in and saves the day, then that means that in that story, the situation, the day could be saved. Somebody could do it. Then I want to hear the story of that person. Then I want to simply be that person. If there is a situation that somebody can solve, good fiction tells us the story of the person that does that. And again, from time to time, we want to also acknowledge those that tried very hard, and so we look at the stories of the losers. But that is, frankly, in all of literature and fiction, film, etc., a minor trend. What is this digression meant to tell us when we're talking about pandemic legacy? there is a story that progresses as you open envelopes, as you take on new components, as you add rules. There is a story that develops throughout the campaign and therefore throughout the year represented in the story. It is, however, a story that very often you get the sense you're witnessing rather than building. Is there a person, say a criminal, hypothetically, no spoilers, that people are trying to catch? You try hard and you don't catch it, and the story will progress the following month more or less as if you had caught it. Somebody else did. You failed to do something, the story progresses more or less as if you had done it. That means in the world of the story, somebody else did it. I think that there is an enormous potential here to create a wonderful story, to create an emergent narrative. My impression is that here that wasn't done exactly, or not in an intense and deep way as it could have been, because the story will go on a monorail in any ways. In any case, you will follow that story. I think I would have liked it very much if there had been a branching path of stories. Now, that may have even increased the number of components and the price to pay, and probably then at the end you wouldn't have used some of the components, because if you did something there and you succeeded there, then a certain set of options opens, and if you failed or did something else, another set of options opens, and so the story will progress in different ways, as opposed to being you that are somehow struggling different ways against a single path that will continue through the stories. In that path, sometimes you'll get more resources or less resources, and that's really the biggest difference between all of these things. So to me, that is a missed opportunity, a big pity. I hope that in the future people that use the legacy system will try to give us more of a story where we take on the role of the protagonist, we affect the story. Of course, again, that means adding branches to the story that will not necessarily be taken, but then, heck, the ones that are taken, you know that you are the one that caused that path in the story to be unlocked, to open. You are the protagonist, you are the hero, you're not an involved witness. It is there where things happen, but it is not always necessarily making things happen. So it's not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea. The overall story still has reasons for interest, but I wish that the players had more of a say in where the story goes. As for the story itself, yes, as the components are taken out of boxes and envelopes, and stickers are added to the board and to the rulebook, there's also a theme that is created, there is a plot that is created through these elements. But I have to tell you, the plot, don't get me wrong, is certainly not earth-shattering, is not something that is probably going to surprise you a lot. There is one thing that I frankly did not expect, in a sense. I can't get into details, send me a message if you're curious about what I mean here. There's a thing that I said, oh, I wish that surprising thing happened, but it looked like it's not happening, and then it did happen. But other than that, the plot is fairly predictable, it's fairly obvious. And this is a limitation that simply comes from the original theme of the story. Pandemic is about an epidemic. Now think about what are the big dramatic stories that are told about an epidemic. What are the stories, the kind of movies, the kind of plots that start with that, with an expanding epidemic? There are only one or two ways really that the story can go, and you have seen the story in many movies and you've seen it many times. Now, let me say, what is a story that emerges from an epidemic, etc., etc.? I can think of two mainly, and it's not the first one I just thought of. It's not the first one. It's the other one. You know, the first idea, oh, the story's about that. It's not that one. It's just the next one. So it's still not a big surprise. So the story is not particularly surprising. It doesn't take many risks there. It follows very well-traveled paths of popular fiction and narrative. Again, nothing particularly wrong with that, it's just a little bit of a missed opportunity. I can't wait until somebody applies the legacy idea, the legacy take on, say, adventure games, dungeon crawlers, or fantasy games with a campaign system, say like like Runebound, where you're traveling through a land and visiting different places. Then you open the material, the packages for the dungeon that you're exploring, then different things happen. Then the story can go in vastly different ways. Then you're precipitated into a parallel dimension, an elemental dimension. Then the monster destroys half of the land, etc., etc. Now, you may wonder, there are already games that in a sense do that, games that have a campaign system, Shadows of Brimstone, the scenarios for the D&D board games that you can play as a one-shot game, so you start from the beginning and you go through them. But it's still, in a sense, when you play those games, you see the components, and if you saw like stickers on the components as destroy this city, etc., etc., open this world, open a gate to another dimension, you will know that that is coming. Knowing the components right away to start with tells you something already. You do not have the kind of surprises that you could have. Of course, you could also flip through the rule book, and maybe you don't want to, but by mistake you see like title of the thing, revenge the death of your friend. Oh, okay, so a friend's gonna die, fine. So the legacy element has this phenomenal potential of bringing mystery and surprise to a sequence of board games in a way that I had not seen in board games before. That also means it has a narrative potential in board gaming which is higher than what we've seen before. It brings the very narrative potential of role-playing games, of literature, of film, of video games that have a story, of storytelling in general. Storytelling, to borrow to borrow words from theology, has a dispensational power. Narrative doesn't give you all of the options of the story at the first place, in the first page, doesn't tell you everything that may possibly happen and everything that the characters can do. Narrative storytelling disperses meaning as the story progresses. This is where you can have plot twists, this is where you can have surprises, this you can have things going in ways that you did not expect. In board games, this is not exactly the case. Think of chess. Of course, as you become proficient in chess, you see new patterns and new ways of using the very well-known possibilities emerge. But new possibilities, the basic composition of the formula remains the same. You do not have 10 new white pieces that enter the board because the king managed to make an alliance with another clan from another chessboard. You do not have the two queens scheming to kill one of the kings. You don't have a bishop that turns out in reality to be an imposter from another game. Oh my gosh, it turns out that that's one of the characters from Candyland. You can't have the sort of surprises. You can have half of the board destroyed by dragons, of the chessboard destroyed by dragons. So board games have a certain lower degree of surprise and a narrative element. Board games have tried to inject more and more narrative elements over the decades, starting from the earlier role-playing games. So board game designers have started learning from that idea and bringing them in. I had never seen a narrative potential as big as that of fiction in board games before I played Pandemic Legacy. That was an unprecedented potential, and I think that the potential was vastly untapped here. Because at the end, as I said, the story is nothing all that powerful, all that unpredictable, so we're missing on an opportunity there. And the story is not all that interactive. Within each scenario, within each game, you do a lot of interesting things, and these scenarios do play differently from one another. As you open new components and add new rules, you add new challenges. They change the game in very interesting ways. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy playing every single game that I played of Pandemic Legacy. And as I did that, I was desperately hoping that these games would coalesce into a narrative story that was interesting, intense, and interactive. Because interesting games of Pandemics I played before, in the original Pandemic, in the expansions of Pandemic, and I play more interesting one-shot games here in Pandemic. What I had never played was this exciting campaign full of plots and twists, and I didn't find it here, unfortunately. as I was opening new components, adding them to the board, and changing the game, I got the sense that I was playing different variants of the game. Pretty much like you have in some of the expansions that come with components that will make the game work in different ways. Say the expansion on the brink. Then you have different ways of playing the game. And frankly, the fact that you know all of the possibilities of the expansions, all of these styles of gameplay allowed by the expansion, doesn't ruin on the brink. It's not like, oh, I can play this or that. Damn it, that thing spoils that other thing. And I had the impression in reality that here, if the secret elements had not been secret at all, they had been presented as simply as a list of options. You can play traditional pandemic, or you can add that challenge, or you can play with a disease that behaves that way, or you can play by having this character here, or you can play by adding that extra goal. I don't think that my experience with Pandemic Legacy would have been very different. I would have enjoyed every variant, I would have enjoyed the new ideas, I would have enjoyed every single game. I wouldn't have had the sense of a strong story emerging from these options that I can navigate in any order, but ultimately I didn't have much of a sense of a strong story emerging from Pandemic Legacy either. So it's not that there's something in Pandemic that I didn't like in Pandemic Legacy. What I found in Pandemic Legacy, I liked all of it. What I disliked are the things that I liked that it really looked like this game was going to deliver and didn't. So it may be just a matter of expectations, but to me it's a matter of really untapped and exploited possibilities. Maybe more than a review, this video is just my monologue, my appeal, my manifesto in the hope that game designers will exploit the potential of the legacy idea, of the legacy system, by giving us truly emergent, truly immersive, truly interactive stories where the players are the protagonists. They affect the direction of the story, and they do that in significant ways, and with the insertion of significant plot twists and narrative elements. When we will have that, we will have board games that tell you a strong story. As is, Pandemic Legacy, what does it do? Allows you to play Pandemic, allows you to play many variants of Pandemics, many different scenarios, but in a way that is not strikingly, radically different from what previous expansions of Pandemic had done by adding different style of plays. When I was playing Pandemic Legacy, I had the sense I was playing a string of variants that were delivered to me in a very specific order with a big deal about secrecy. But if I think about it in retrospect, they could have been delivered in different ways. They could have been delivered simultaneously, giving me all the options, the way somebody who is teaching you chess is telling you about all the options on the board, all the movements that the pieces can perform. I don't think there would have been that big of a difference if this had been presented as a new on the brink type of expansion. So, after so much complaining, let me remind you this. I liked it. I liked all of the game styles. I liked the different options. I liked the different ways of playing Pandemic that this box offers. Unfortunately, I think that there is just so much potential that hasn't been exploited here, and I really hope that will be in the future, because the legacy system shows that board gaming has an enormous ability, power to tell stories. At least there's a potential here. I don't think this is the game that does it. I don't think this is the game that demonstrates that power, but hints at it, shows that it can be done. And I just hope in the future somebody will do it. Somebody will deliver a legacy game that tells us a mighty, powerful story in ways that are comparable to narratives in other media, such as, say, literature, film, comic books, and so on and so forth.